So here's the thing I certainly did not expect to be talking about, which is changes in the universal solar retrieval. I did a retraining only a couple of weekends, 3 weekends ago, so 3 weeks ago was the last time we did the training, and the training before that was done last year in July. And these time, whenever I do a training, there's always new development. So there's a big development which I've not had a chance to speak about, which is that up until last year, all the work was done by me getting into my light trance states, tuning in to my guides and helpers, and I was going to this particular place which was an orange healing room, and it's on a planet which has got a binary star system, a large giant orange star and a small dwarf blue star, and the planet is very dry. There is no extra water. It's not like the planet Earth, which is full of oceans and lakes and rivers, nothing like that. There's no exposed water whatsoever. And I've been doing all the work since the very beginning of the USR entirely in that location. And then last July it starts to change, because when I take people into the training, there's the most exciting part for me, which is when we go and we journey outside of the solar system. We head straight for the galactic core using the drumbeat and our active imaginations, and we go right out the other side of the Milky Way galaxy into what I call the intergalactic void. That's the space between all the galaxies. And literally have this experience of being completely surrounded by blackness in all directions, but in the distance, everywhere you look, there are these tiny white dots, and each white dot is a galaxy, and that's how I perceive it. So on this journey, what I call the journey of lifetimes, having reached the intergalactic void, we then target the Andromeda galaxy, and that's where this planet is located. And I've been going there every time I do a training, and never the rest of the time, not in this conscious way. Well, something very strange and unusual happened for me last July, because we went to the orange planet, and I was aware of a green planet. I've been there before on excursions with other trainings, but this time we get to spend a lot of time there, and I was given a whole series of brand new healing modalities. So these days, when I start the work, the first work is always a negative energy release. And that used to be on the orange couch in the orange healing room with the client's energy body lying down there and the blue vortex opening up above and sucking the negative energies out. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. So what happens instead is as follows. So I need to just digress and tell you something about the green planet. So the green planet is in the same star system as the orange planet. Like the orange planet, there are no obvious bodies of water anywhere at all. And yet there is so much more water on this planet, because the orange planet has very little vegetation, very little plant life growing on it. It's quite barren actually, with lots and lots of pyramidical buildings. But this green planet is completely covered with plants. Now, when I talk about the helpers that I have working with me, the two helpers with the names, they come from the orange planet. They're Padema and Dementia. They were introduced to me by David the Shaman Chef years ago. The other two helpers don't have names. They come from the green planet, and there isn't any name usage. They simply have no purpose for names, because they all automatically tune into their energy signature. So let me describe this planet to you. So it's a planet which is green. The overriding colour is green, so it's called the green planet. And the vegetation is huge and tall. And when I did a USR very recently and was writing out my reports, and I was describing these plants as trees, the two unknown helpers, one of them stepped up, and the first time he'd ever actually, well, let's not use a gender, it's the first time that helper had ever communicated to me with words. And I was really quite surprised, because the first words are, it's not a tree, you can't use that terrestrial terminology. You can use the word plant, but tree is not suitable. Imagine a plant, imagine a planet which is completely covered in plant life, and these plants are far taller than the tallest terrestrial trees. They're absolutely huge, and they just extend upwards into the cosmos as you'd expect them to do. It's obviously a good atmosphere on this planet. Now, if that was all there was to it, it would be incredibly dark, but what has happened is there are what I call light corridors. So the vegetation orientates itself in such a way that there is frequent cylinders of no growth of plants, which enables the light from the stars to shine down onto the planet. So there is plenty of light there in that way. So when I'm doing the negative energy release, what happens is, from last July onwards, is there is a pod, and the pod looks like a gigantic coconut. Just imagine a gigantic green coconut, and it arises from out of the surface of the planet, and it opens itself up, and the client's energy body pops inside, and the pod closes itself up and it burrows itself into the ground. And the negative energy release is done from there, and the curse removal is done from there, and the energy body scan and repair is done from there, and the DNA work is done from there. So the first 4 stages of the USR process tend to be done there, which is really quite remarkable how that's happened. And I just want to remind you about plants. It's so easy for us to not be aware of how full of life they are. They are sentient, they are conscious. And I just love Terence McKenna and the people who make these films because they have a name, Happy Plants, and this relates. So you've got an entire planet full of happy plants, very, very happy indeed, in a state of oneness with the now. So the person's energy body is inside this pod. The pod is gone back into the surface of the planet, and then what goes on as follows. And it's funny I should be wearing this card today because a violet gel gets secreted within the pod, and the gel surrounds the client's energy body, and it literally draws the negative energies out, just like toxins being drawn out of a wound. It really is that simple. It's a very gentle process indeed, and when all the negative energies are drawn out into that gel, there's a tiny little vortex at one end of the pod, and it just sucks all the negative energies out, and they get taken to their heaven dimension, as you have seen before in the previous features on the subject of the USR. So that's something new. And as soon as that's done, then there's a curse removal. Now what happens with the curse removal is the next thing that goes on inside the pod is a violet vapour is secreted, and this vapour has the effect of causing all the curse words uttered by all beings in all lifetimes. So whenever a person has ever said to themselves, you ... oh you ... the way people talk to themselves and their thoughts, or when other people load them up with all these negative opinions, well, all of those get affected by this violet vapour, and the violet vapour causes them literally to disintegrate. And again, this disintegrated remains of these curse words, which literally at that point, this tiny fragments just sucked up into that tiny little vortex at the end of the pod and removed and taken away. So that's those processes. The energy body scan and repair also happens in that space, and I just get information about what particular parts of the body it is that need working on, and all the work is done within the pod, and if the guides are called upon to do particular things, they do so. And then it's the DNA work. So when the DNA work starts, what happens as follows. The violet gel's gone, the violet vapour's gone, this space, and the whole pod fills with this golden yellow light, and I become aware of the DNA in the client's energy body. It's scintillating, it's iridescent, it's bright, it's beautiful, because that's what DNA actually is. And I am in the process of preparing to make a film about DNA, which will go into the subject in great detail, but just keeping purely to the shamanic component now, I see the DNA, and it's they're helixes, which means they're little vortex shapes, and they're constantly moving, and they're all these colours, and they're very bright and iridescent. And what we notice is the effects of pollution from people living on the earth, because we all get exposed to pollution, and pollution has the possibility to deform the natural construction of DNA. The other things that can mess the DNA up is dehydration. If the body has been dehydrated, that actually affects the DNA in a harmful way. So what happens, you get areas which look like grey or brown or black darkness. So there's areas of darkness, and we can see those in the DNA scan part of the process. And all that happens is that this wonderful golden yellow light transforms any dark areas and renders them into exactly the base pair sequence which is in accordance with the client's higher self, so the DNA is then put back into optimal state. And this used to be a fairly lengthy procedure involving quite a lot of detail, and it was done by my guide Worm. Now Worm has nothing to do, it's all done within the pod, and when the DNA is rectified, the final thing that happens is that there are little parts on the end of each of the DNA base pair sequences, which are called the telomeres. And this is the thing with the aging program. So it's the telomeres that control the aging program. And the best way to picture this, if you can picture something like a pie, just imagine a pie. And when the person lives their life, if they're following the conventional view, they're being influenced by their culture with the aging program, and they're consuming things which are harmful for their bodies over a period of time. It's rather like someone takes a slice out of that pie, and so there's suddenly the pie, but there's a slice missing. And as more time goes by, a person gets exposed to more trauma, more stress, more distress, and then chunks get taken out of the pie until the pie becomes smaller and smaller. Well, all that happens inside the pod when the aging program is restored is that however little of the pie is left, it simply expands and expands and expands and becomes bigger and bigger up until the point that the person's higher self is happy with. So people end up with a much larger pie than what they start with. That's the way I would describe that particular process, the aging process with the DNA. So all this work is now done there on this green planet. The green planet is teeming with life. Apart from all the plant life, there are all the beings that inhabit it, such as the two helpers that choose to work with me that are natives to that planet. And what's particularly interesting for me is it relates to something that one of the people who trained last year, Kim, she had an awareness about this and sent me an email of some image which conveys this. And I've come across science fiction writers who've described the same thing, which is imagine sentient beings who are so in cooperation and in tune with plants and understand it's all about love. And what they do is, using the power of their consciousness, in cooperation with the plants, they actually change the shape of the plants to create anything that it requires. They create their own homes, they create their own vehicles for movement, all done through this natural intelligent cooperation with the plants. So those are some of the extra things we've noticed in our journeys to this particular green planet. So what I haven't talked about is the karma release, and I also haven't talked about the universal soul retrieval process itself. The karma release is pretty much exactly the same as it always has been. And just to reiterate, I am drawn to focus on the relationship with the client and one other person, some key person in their lives. And what happens is I'm aware of the connection between the two, the client and the other person. I don't work on either, I work just upon the cord. And what always happens is the energy of the light of the sun comes into the cord and it blasts it with that beautiful yellow energy of our sun, the sun we've got over our planet Earth, and that cleanses the cord. Any toxicity gets removed, it gets burnt out. One-way valves get installed, which means that neither party can take energy from the other without express permission being granted. And that is actually all that we need to do. If the cord is damaged, it gets repaired. If the clear outcome from that process is that the people need to separate, then the cord breaks into thousands of golden globes and that's it. And if the connection remains, then that's also fine. And I need to say that sometimes if the cord gets shattered into thousands of globes, that is simply an indication not that the person doesn't relate to that person anymore, but they start completely from scratch. So either way, it's fine. So then the actual USR itself, it's very similar, except for one crucial detail to me, which is that when I receive an inquiry, then at some point, usually within the day, I will tune into that person. And as soon as I tune into that person, what happens is the guides, the helpers, and the aspect of myself that does this work, we already go scurrying off to locate these lost soul parts. And this is why sometimes there's a delay. Sometimes there's a delay between the person asking for the OSR and me actually finishing the job, writing the report and emailing it to them. I don't really know why it's done like this, but this is the way it's done. So there is this time delay, and me and the others, we go off and we find the soul parts and we bring them back. And this then means this process is taking at the very least hours, but sometimes days, and sometimes even longer than days. So that when I sit down to do the OSR itself, there's no looking, we've found them all. That seems to be really important. And I have absolutely no idea why. Something that I probably have another chance to speak about in the original film I will speak about now. This has been going on for a long time. When these soul parts are located, they get brought back to a very special location, and it's a lagoon. And the lagoon, if you know what a lagoon is, basically you have an island with a shape like that, and it's a body of water which is almost enclosed but not quite, a very protected body of water. In that lagoon, when we arrive, there are always dolphins and children swimming in the water. Remember, I have two of my guides are dolphins, so we've got a very strong dolphin connection anyway, and the soul parts go and spend time playing with the children and the dolphins in the water, and there's always guide Narbeth on the beach with all the food that they could possibly require to give them sustenance. And if the soul parts had been lost through many lifetimes previously, this could mean that the soul parts have been lost for many, many thousands of years. So Narbeth, it's always his job. He's the one that brings them up to speed with the changes that have taken place since they were originally lost. And as I say, if you imagine it was a lifetime, it was the Romans, you could be talking about a couple of thousand years gone by. So there's obviously a fair amount needed to do, so the soul parts get brought up to speed with all the changes which are relevant for them to know about, so that when they do get returned to the client, they're in the know. So it's a funny thing, this, because as I'm speaking about, I'm actually gaining an understanding which I didn't have before I started making this film, which is that this extra time delay is valuable, because it means that the soul parts are far more prepared than they ever used to be, which is going to mean it's going to be a gentler and a more effective process for you, the client. So that's a big thing, the fact that they have the time in this nurturing place. And here's the thing I want to explain. You know how time is an illusion and how clock time is the prevalent way we relate to everything here. Sometimes the helpers and the guides will give me an understanding that those soul parts are spent from the point of view of a terrestrial viewpoint, the equivalent of 17 years there. In other words, an incredibly long period of time. Now, that may only take hours or days in terms of my personal awareness of doing the process. But the idea of there being a safe place where they get to spend as much time as they want, where the only agenda is play and having fun and lots of good nutrition and good teaching. So that's what all the soul parts for the USR receive as a standard automatically, and I've not even thought to share it with anyone before. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that, and I didn't even realise how important that is until I started speaking about it. So I'm delighted to say that there are more and more people booking for USRs. It's going great, and I have very recently a new graduate, and he's doing phenomenally well. I suspect he's going to be the first person for a while to achieve full accreditation. So there are plenty of people out there who do this work, so don't hesitate. If you feel it's right for you, just make your booking. Thank you very much.